Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with top minds and leaders from across the nation to share perspectives that help advance FSE's mission, which is building capacity, raising awareness, and elevating school board leadership across our communities. I'm Julia Kelleher, your host and the Executive Director of First State Educate. Today's episode is about something really powerful. Something it can be very easy to talk about, but a little bit harder to actually do. And that's making room for students to lead. So the question is, what happens when students don't get to just show up at school, but they get a seat at the board table? Our guests today are going to bring firsthand insight about what that's like. I'm pleased to introduce Andrea Parameter, the Secretary and Board Member from the Durango School District, District 9R. Rita Karim, who's a former student representative from the Fairfax County Public School Board, and Connor Moykins, who's a student representative currently at RSU 26 in Maine. Thank you all for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having us.
So there's a growing movement to include student representation in boards, and there's a good reason for that. Like, students offer on the ground, frontline experience about what climate, curriculum, extracurricular, mental health, what all of that feels like. So when student voices are heard, I guess the idea is that student engagement or civic engagement and this participatory process is a little bit stronger. So Andrea, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. Why do you believe as a board member that student voice belongs at the board table?
Yeah, so as a school board member, what I think all of us realize that we are tasked with the fiduciary responsibility of a school district, oversight on student achievement, safety, but we are very, very, very far removed from the classroom when we make our decisions, right? We don't interact with students very often, which means that we do not generally incorporate the student voice. What are their actual needs when we are sitting there making policy and governance decisions that are going to affect them directly? Mm-hmm. And so when you speak to students, they'll say things like, why are we taking these standardized tests? What are we doing this for? And it becomes clear that they're being told to do things maybe without any understanding. And what we find often is that students don't understand the agency that they have. They don't understand that they have a voice that they can use. They sort of do as they're told in public school. And we think that it's really important to bridge the gap between where we sit at this podium and what's happening in the actual classroom on a day-to-day. So having students and getting that student voice onto our board, they give us inputs. We use our student board members in Durango, Colorado as advisors, and they sit at every meeting. And what students, and the two students on this call will probably be able to attest to this, can give you that you cannot get is the peer-to-peer viewpoint and interaction. Students are, boy, if you want to know what's happening on the ground, don't talk to the teachers in the classroom, talk to the kids. Sure. And knowing and getting their input makes us a stronger and a better board. So
yeah, that's a fabulous answer. Touched on so many points that I think are really important. But really, it was curious. I'm sure you noticed that, Rita and Connor were shaking their heads. Yes, they were nodding in agreement, right? So do either of you two want to share sort of the what resonated?
Definitely, yeah. I think Andrea captured it really well, in the sense that the adults are definitely removed from the classroom, so they don't necessarily have an authentic understanding of the student experience, and that's why it's so powerful to have students in the room, because they bring that lived experience, and essentially that lived experience cuts through abstraction. In my county, we had a policy that was focused around universal Chromebook access for all high school students. And once it was passed, we had students come to one of our meetings, and they spoke about how, yes, they have access to new technology now, but they don't necessarily have Wi-Fi or internet at home to use that technology. And so that's such a powerful example of lived experience coming into a boardroom where decisions like that are made that affects students. And so it definitely brings that lived experience in and just shows the other side of the story, because sometimes on paper it can look like perfect and you think everything will go well, but you don't know what's happening on the other side until students are actually in the room.
Yeah, it's a great, things do always look good on paper until you actually try to go do them. But I guess Chromebook with no internet isn't going to do much for you.
Yeah.
Connor, what about you?
Yeah, I think Andrea raises so many important points, especially when you look at the like generational divide and how many things have changed within public schools since a lot of people in elected positions on school boards were in high school. Like when they were in high school, a lot of learning was not digital. It wasn't over computers. They didn't have phones within classrooms. And around all this technology, there's been so many changes for better or for worse. And especially with topics such as schools having new phone policies, which is a very hot topic right now in school boards all around the US. It's really difficult for school board members to grasp the way students feel about it. And there's often such a strong disconnect without communication on students not understanding why the school is taking their phone and the schools not understanding why students are so attached to their phones within classrooms.
Yeah. But now, Andrea, to you, I mean, you're nodding your head. I mean, it's so funny when you do hear the two perspectives in one room. It really does. It adds such breadth and depth to the conversation.
I don't think I could count the amount of impacts the student voice, our student board members speaking up, have had on decisions that we have made. From completely changing course on things to changing the way we communicate, to allocating our budget differently, to changing our course offerings, right? Because at the end of the day, we are here you're our end user. The students are like our customer. We're not a business, right? But that is who we are there to serve. And if we don't get the input, especially, here's another piece that we didn't say on what is working. Right. So we put these policies in place and then they take a while to kind of filter through the system. Maybe new curriculum has rolled out to you guys. Right. And if we don't ask the kids, is this working for you? And if not, why not? And listen to them, then we aren't going to be making improvements that serve them. Right. And the idea is to not only serve the kids, but to give them the best that we can give them. Right. And we need to listen to them to make sure that we're meeting them where they are.
Fantastic. And like I said in the beginning, easy to say, probably harder to do.
Yeah.
But Rita, back over to you. What's one of the benefits that you've seen, as a result of your participation?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like an avenue for feedback loops. Like Andrea was saying, students, they receive support, but sometimes the important question is asking who's not receiving like the impact of our work and why. And so I feel like the student is kind of the liaison between that, going out into the community, visiting schools. That peer-to-peer discussion and just that environment creates a very comfortable space for students to share what they're experiencing in their schools, and that makes feedback loops that can then go back to senior leadership. And I think just having a student board member as a resource is so powerful, because students are oftentimes scared of district leaders just because of their titles and they're adults, and sometimes it can be intimidating. So when it's peer-to-peer, they see you as a friend, and it's also like that friend is also someone who is connected to the stakeholders, so they can then, bring those messages to those in power. So definitely is pretty helpful.
And Connor, for you, what have you learned? I mean, have all those things that were just said, do they resonate with you? And if that's true, like, what did you learn? What's changed about your view and education of education or leadership as a result of these experiences?
Yeah, being on a school board has definitely taught me a ton about the intricacies of different school systems, but probably the most important lesson I've learned is how vital civic engagement is from different stakeholders. I feel like that's a very common answer that student board members will give when asked that question, but it's very true. A lot of times people don't really realize, even though it would seem obvious if you really thought about it, that these elected officials don't necessarily know everything about the communities that they're supposed to be representing, to no fault of their own, but they're just physically incapable of being everywhere all the time.
Right.
And representation adds so much. It enlightens them on whole new communities and topics that they weren't previously aware of. And so, yeah, it's really shown me how important it is to show up and talk about lived experiences.
Yeah, that's fabulous. This is all great. It's an emerging topic in Delaware, this idea of bringing more student voice to decision making, I think at all levels. And so maybe we could give some concrete examples, right? So let's talk about something that went really, really well. A big win. I kind of feel like that Chromebook story was like a big win because it could have been something where money was invested, a policy was put in place, and then didn't work at all. But can anyone share like something that you were like, wow, this was just so amazing, and the work made such a difference for the quality of a student's experience?
Definitely. I served on the Fairfax County School Board, which is near the DC area. So it's very a diverse, populated area. And so our school district had around 200,000 students, but there was only one student board member seat. And so serving in that position made it very challenging to accurately represent such a large crowd and all those different diverse perspectives, and even just the geography of our county. Like some schools were a few hours apart. So it's just challenging to put yourself out in the community, especially when you also have a student schedule.
Mhm.
And so during my time on the school board, I established a second student seat. That way we could divide and conquer and again, like
Mhm.
effectively represent more students in the county. And I
Mhm.
just think that was very impactful because it hasn't been established yet. It'll be established in the 25-26 school year, but it still just allows for student representation to be effective at a higher level. Instead of one voice, we have two voices now, and I think that's very powerful.
Congratulations, that's amazing. What an accomplishment. So like, I'll leave
Thank
a
you.
legacy too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Andrea?
You want something that worked well that the
Yeah.
students were involved with? Is
Just
that
a
what you're
big
saying?
win on your district that as a result of engaging with the student voice.
Well, a big win for our district, what I think became a big win for our state, which was fairly
Mhm.
controversial at the time, was when the student board members came to the board and said, we would like to be able to carry Narcan on our person. There had been an overdose in our community. And at that time, it was administered, the nurses and things had it in the school. And students, if they had a prescription, could carry it off campus. But they said, hey, we go from sports to a party. We don't go home. It's in our car. You need it when you need it. And they petitioned the school board. And I will tell you, it was a big win. I was pretty for it from the beginning. We
Mhm.
became over the counter right after this. But
Mhm.
what the kids did is, I mean, they got involved. They had protests or rallies, I would say, like
Mhm.
protests before our board
Mhm.
meetings. They brought people in. They got involved with all of the high schools in the area, the charter school as well. They brought
Mhm.
everybody in because they had learned that their voices mattered. They could speak truth to the
Mhm.
power as they had done on the board,
Mhm.
and they brought this to us. And at the end, they organized a community-wide forum with the police and first responders and medical
Oh
people,
wow.
law
Wow.
enforcement, teachers, the superintendent. They brought everybody to the public library,
Mhm.
and they also brought with them the a statute that our lawyers, our legal counsel had not found that made it
Mhm.
actually lawful for this to occur. We voted for it. And then they wound up working with our state legislator to craft statewide policy. And it is now legal not only for students in the state of Colorado to carry it, but to administer it as well.
Wow.
Because
That's huge.
there's
When
a
did this happen?
Good Samaritan Act. This happened 2 school years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
every year our kids sort of have a project, but that started from sitting on the school board, seeing a lot of turmoil with COVID and masking, and understanding how the process worked,
Mhm.
and having a voice, and then sharing it with their peers when something came to their
Mhm.
attention, expanding it to a greater community, involving everybody, and then bringing it all
Mhm.
the way to the state. I think that was a big win.
Yeah, that's a great story, and really, like, both of those stories really show the lasting impact. I mean, you're not talking about one policy and one, you know, one little the. Whereas I said sort of wrongfully, right? Like the Chromebook example was a good one. That sort of pales in comparison to creating a second board seat and then getting state legislation passed.
That's a big one. And can I add one really quick one? I'd like Connor to
Sure.
as well. But the biggest win, I would say personally for me, I serve as the mentor to the students, is watching the personal growth, even within
Mhm.
a school year, from being afraid maybe to speak to suddenly raising their hand, being first to
Mhm.
organize, finding the voice, presenting at state conferences, the growth
Mhm.
that I've seen in the students, the essays they've written about their experiences that have gotten them into top-notch
Mhm.
schools, and the way some of their life trajectories have changed because of this experience.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
to me has been a big win.
that's
The
awesome.
biggest. Yeah.
What about you, Connor? What's your best moment?
Yeah. So one thing that happened in the previous school year was students were really focused on climate change and how it's going to be affecting our futures as students, being the youngest stakeholder within schools. And so something great that students did was got together to develop a proposal for a climate literacy course, which they spent hours working on this, planning it, and over time presented it to the board, which it eventually passed. And now this school year, my school is going to have a climate literacy course, which will be in English credit that students get through reading papers on climate change.
Fascinating. These are all great stories. Wow. I mean, and that leaves a legacy too, right? It's now a course offering. It's going to educate, future generations of students. Phenomenal. Okay, so I think, this is great. And First Aid Educate wants to bring this idea and let Delawareans know that this is out there. And again, I'm telling you that people have come to me and said that they're really interested in finding ways to have more student voice. So I think it's equally as important to point out that it doesn't always go perfectly, right? This is not a panacea. This isn't something that, you do it and everything's just going to fall into place and every student is going to be up for the challenge, right? So could we share a little bit about some of the growing pains, things that maybe weren't so great? Just because I think that it's important for people when they want to implement something new to have eyes wide open, right? And maybe learning from others' missteps so that you can actually build around, you can mitigate certain risks if you know that they're coming. If you don't know to anticipate them, it's very hard to respond. Yeah. So who's got a great story to kick us off?
I could talk about a couple of things real quick.
Okay.
One is if you do in fact get the students on your board, they're there as our peers, right? They don't have a vote, but certainly equal input on many things, not everything, not executive sessions. But we had a couple of incidents during the COVID times when we had some really tough board meetings. We had really angry public around the masking policies from the state, et cetera. They were coming to the meetings and being threatening, violent. Social media got really, really heated. And it was very frightening for our students in real time to be hollered at in a meeting. When meetings get heated, you see this at town halls on the news. This happens in student board meetings. And it's important to remember then, as the adults in the room, that these are still kids, right? And that this is, for us, we have to sort of see what in charge, but to always have the safety first and foremost. We were walking them to their cars in and out of the building, and certainly you could choose not to attend. But remembering that peers at the table, but still kids is an important one. And then the other one, I would say that this is my 6th year as a mentor for this program, and really having just taken it from 1 student to now 5. We should have the ducks in a row. I would say you need policy in place. You need your roles, responsibilities, and protocols. You really need to have thought out, how are you going to choose your board members? What's your diplomatic process for doing it? Besides, how do they act in the meeting and the logistics of how many meetings? Yeah. You need your policy and your governance in place before you do it. And without that, you may go astray a little bit during your meeting.
I just want to go back to that first example because what popped into my mind, was the fact that aggressive and hostile behavior is inappropriate no matter who it's directed to. Should be the starting point. But it's really, really interesting that we look at it in the context of a younger person and how they're not that any of us, even as adults, are prepared for some of the things that come at us, but the fact that that's not an appropriate behavior to expose young people to. I think that's one point that stands out, but then also kind of makes me say, well, if you wouldn't do it to kids, why would you do it to adults? You know what I mean? Like,
it shouldn't happen.
I love that. It shouldn't happen, period.
It shouldn't happen. But at the end of the day, having gone through that very difficult school year, and this went on for meeting after meeting after meeting, the students who were frightened at the beginning, they came out even more empowered of their rights, of their responsibilities, of what right and wrong is. And it very much impacted their thinking, I think, lifelong.
That's great.
From the experience.
And so positives come from that.
It was positive at the end, I think. Learnings.
Yep. Okay.
I also have a few challenges I can share. I think one of the biggest ones I struggled with was just being the only student in the room. Like, I often felt intimidated by the adults and that I couldn't approach them just because there's a generational gap, and it's like my first time experiencing something of that sort in a professional environment. So it's important for the adults in the room to just be welcoming and have open body language and smiling and just be inclusive. And then I think another challenge I noticed was that a lot of times in our student meetings, I mentioned this earlier, but students wouldn't necessarily speak up just because they felt intimidated. And so throughout my service, I learned that it's better to introduce yourself with your name and why you do what you do. Like, why do you do your role instead of just the title of your role? Because that way students are able to understand why the individual is so passionate about their job, and that creates a much more welcoming environment. And I think the last challenge I faced was definitely just not having any pre-service training. I went into the role without having guidance from my predecessor. And so I was very new to policy, and when it comes to the budget and just serving in the role in general is very challenging without having that training.
Yeah. All three great points. Great points.
Thank
Connor,
you.
any of those similar for you?
Yeah, I would definitely mirror what Rita was saying around how intimidating it can be to walk into a room for the first time and see a ton of pretty new faces that you haven't necessarily spoke to before, who are all in like roles of power within the school district, and to learn to interact with them and represent the student body to them with not always a lot of skills on how board meetings work. I remember Robert's rules was something that took me forever to figure out, and I'd be sitting in the meetings a little bit confused. Even though my school district did have some onboarding training, it doesn't ever equate to actually going through the actual meetings. And one other challenge that I've seen in my district, which is a more general challenge, is weighing the needs of the students versus the needs of others in the community, because at the end of the day, the public school district is public for the community, certain amenities. Specifically in my district, there was a lot of controversy over the tennis courts. Community members wanted to put pickleball lines over the tennis courts to accommodate playing pickleball, and many of the students very widely opposed this, as it would be potentially disruptive for the tennis team in matches. And it was kind of that question of who gets priority in this, the community members or the students. So that's one other challenge we faced.
Really interesting. This is just so fascinating. I appreciate y'all sharing these insights. So much to learn from what you're sharing. I'm wondering, in this last segment, could we sort of focus in on Delaware, right? I've said twice now that Delaware wants to move in this direction. Maybe we'll go in backwards in order. So, Connor, what's one recommendation that you would share with someone in Delaware if they want to do this well? What's a thing to consider? Make sure you do.
Yeah, is this sharing for like the school board members and the superintendent? Okay. Yeah, I would say definitely just being like overly outgoing for what you expect, because students are often terrified going into this. And so them just being as friendly as possible will help reduce the learning curve and really get the student out of their shell as soon as possible and really start sharing their experiences. So just like building those relationships super early on is so important, and I could not recommend it more.
Because by the end, you probably feel ready to share, but it's the end. So maybe that's not the best time to share. Rita?
Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Connor said. 100% agree. I also think just the pre-service training is very important. Like, I know the adults get professional development, they attend conferences for their roles, so it's very important that the student receives that same training and that same treatment, in the sense that they're also board members at the end of the day. Just because they're a student board member doesn't mean they aren't a real board member. So giving them the training and the tools and the resources they need to effectively serve in their role. Like, I think about this all the time, that if I had that pre-service training, I would have been able to effectively represent the school district so much more.
Great. Andrea?
I would say that each board needs to ask themselves, are they ready for it? I mean, that's the first question. Why? Can you answer
Mhm.
why would you want students on your board? And if you have them realistically, what role are they going to serve? What's the expectation? You've got logistics around that, but it all needs to be part of your governance and policy. But you really need to, what is the board readiness? What is the board receptiveness? Right?
Mhm.
If you've got people on the board who are like, I don't really know, I don't want that, the student may not have a very good chance of success, right? If
Mhm.
most people are just like that, I'm not interested in their voice. If you've got a board who genuinely, as my board does, is very invested in the student voice, we really, really
Mhm.
care. It makes a big difference to us and how we govern.
Mhm.
Then your students are going to be more likely to succeed. But you really need to see if you're ready to
Yeah.
support a
And
program.
would you also agree that this pre-service training is important for new student board members when they come
They
on?
need something.
Yeah.
Our students,
So
yeah,
don't just throw them in and
absolutely
say hope
not.
for the best.
No, it's horrible. I'll tell you, just when you are elected to the position. I mean, for us, it's probably 18-month learning curve. The students need, and you wrote this as another question. Maybe you're going to get to. Or I can answer it now, but yes, we give our students 2 hour-and-a-half orientations sessions to
Mhm.
read to do, and then the key thing, I guess, since we're on the topic, is to have a board member that is a designated
Mm.
person that runs your board member
Mhm.
program, that is a designated mentor. That's me in our case.
Mhm.
And it's an
Mhm.
actual, we have board committees and roles, and this is a full-on role on our
Mhm.
school board that I am so happy and honored
Mhm.
to have had for all of these years. And I can tell you each year we get better and we do add more things to the program.
Yeah.
But without an adult who really will take the students and work with them independent of the meetings, just even if it's
Mhm.
text, constant
Mhm.
communication, prep for meetings, bringing things to their attention. I'm constantly using my New York Times subscription every month, sending them
Mhm.
articles to read on education. Somebody that can really help them succeed, I think, is absolutely critical. Otherwise, there's sort of
Yeah.
a body that is scared in a seat,
Yeah.
and that's not
Yeah.
fair and it's not effective.
Yeah. You can tell that you're really passionate about it. I think
So
that's
passionate.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. One other question though about the board training, just in general, for the more traditional board member roles that are not student voices. Do you think that training is important for board members as well?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
something that we're advancing. I mean, we're really doing. There isn't an option. There hasn't been an option, and first aid educator is really the only, you know, end to end training provider
100%.
for capacity building for boards. Yeah.
Yeah, we have it through our state, our Association of School Boards, and they'll do
Mhm.
individualized, and they've got online training, and we can do it as a board. But I think that to offer that, especially up front to a new board member, each
Yeah.
district has its own bit of government, how they do things.
Sure.
But overall, how boards work and the role of
Right.
school boards, and just from the high level down,
Mhm.
100%, I think everybody could
Yeah.
benefit from that. Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. And then back to the student one, Connor and Rita, what topics do you think would be really important?
Yeah, going off of what Andrew was saying, it just reminded me of a conversation I had like last week. I was talking with a professor of educational leadership, and I was telling her about my experience helping to run a conference, which was like national onboarding for student board members that their districts can send them to.
Mhm.
And she was like, wow, that's so amazing. But then she brought up that the training that really needs to happen is to school board members on how to
Mhm.
accommodate for the students, not for the students to learn their position.
Sure.
And I thought that that was just a really interesting idea on how school board trainings could be different coming up in the future to help
Mhm.
host student board members.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you want to train both sides of the equation. If not,
Hmm.
you won't be able to have them work well together.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something I think should be covered is how to navigate intergenerational spaces because as we've all been saying, the student board
Mm.
member is often the only student in the room. And so just navigating those spaces and learning how to go about it and just handling different scenarios. For example, our board meetings would go very late into the night and they were on Thursday. So I would have school the next morning. So at many occasions I was told like, oh, like it's okay to go home early and like if you have homework, it's okay to leave. And like I know their intention was they just had the best interest for me, but
Mhm.
it's kind of devaluing the position itself, because it like that student board member role is that individual is elected to serve and represent the students, and so leaving the board meeting early isn't necessarily doing so. So
Right.
just navigating different conversations and dialogue like that, I think I would appreciate some training on that before I stepped into the role. And then maybe something around the budget and how funds are allocated. I remember when I went out into the community to talk to students, I would often receive questions as to why A school has this sort of equipment and B school doesn't, and I wouldn't have answers. And so it would take a while for me to understand the budget and just essentially notice how like funds are allocated and where we're even getting the money from. And then I think policy is something that's also very important that would need to be covered, because that is what the role is essentially about.
Yeah. Fabulous. You each of you, and then collectively, are just a powerhouse of information and experience. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and I'm so grateful that you spent some of your time with me today and that you've shared all of this fabulous insight and recommendations. Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to make sure that we didn't touch on that you think it's important to share?
My biggest recommendation would be, if you're going to have a student board member program, do not have just one student. Have multiple students. If you have multiple high schools, you could try to get representation from multiple schools, which is what we were able to do here. I'm a school district of under 5,000 students with 5 student board members this year.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's a board member that will take on that role. The students themselves, they're empowered, and they sit together and they have their own ongoing dialogue, and they're much more able to participate, I think, because of that, and share their ideas. It's not as intimidating for them. If there's 5 of us,
Sure.
you can see. So I would say don't just have one student.
Yeah, great.
I would say it's pretty important to create feedback loops. I remember during a lot of our student board meetings or student meetings, we would have the senior leadership come in and we would share out about different challenges we're facing or different resources we would appreciate. And the senior leadership in the room would obviously be very much responsive to that. But then post meeting, there would be no action items, no follow up. And so it was kind of demotivating in the sense that we were sharing out our voices and we were being courageous to do so and brave enough to do so, but there was nothing happening. So it's very important to have those follow up and feedback mechanisms.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I really resonated with what Andrea was saying with having multiple, and building off of that, I think it's very important to have them in different grades as well, having some sort of legacy system. My board always has a senior and a junior student board member, and the senior starts their junior year. So that way there's always an older mentor to help bring the younger student board member into the role. And that's very important.
Yeah. Fabulous. Well, I've learned a lot today. I think, just to recap for the audience and to check to make sure I got it all, but it's important that students have agency, and that a lot of times, you got to make sure that you're hearing from the people who are on the ground experiencing this, because what we think we wrote down on paper isn't exactly what it turns out to be. To not forget that the student is the customer, and how important civic engagement is, and that this whole process sort of hinges on that. But that you've been so effective passing legislation, creating new courses, and then building a new seat and having a second seat now part of a permanent process. I think that's great. The cautions are the ones that we've heard before, right? There's public scrutiny, there's roles and responsibilities that need to be defined, but even with that it's likely that a student would feel intimidated, and that they should have training, and that they need support. And Andre, great job for you for being that mentor. I think the last 3 you drove it home, right? Not just one, feedback loops, and make a legacy system, so that this is there's a stair step approach. Great things for us in Delaware. Fantastic job for each of you in your own communities. You're wonderful examples of how this could work. And again, congratulations for all you've been able to accomplish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Leading Together podcast. Check out our Knowledge Hub on information on student voice on school boards. Thank you.